Fair Play, a novel by Pete Fisher. Chapter 29. Hey, Teacher! The cold autumn wind seemed to cut right through him. Martin stood on the deserted open platform, waiting for the train to Cologne. The local station was a forlorn and primitive place, exposed to the elements all the year round. Martin had just a thin, dark grey suit jacket on that was almost a size too small for him. Underneath it, he wore a white cotton shirt and an unsuitably skinny black tie, all borrowed. He had a new pair of black Levi's and black Doc Martens, polished to a suitable shine. Martin had just successfully completed a week-long basic training course at the most reputable language school in Cologne. He'd been assigned a weekly group from a large electronics conglomerate. Thursdays from 5:30 p.m. until 7. Once on the train, Martin stopped shivering. He watched the trees go by in a blur of autumn colours, trying to remember what they'd taught him. Don't talk too much. Teacher talking time. Stick to English. Let the students do the talking. Make sure they stick to English too. Don't interrupt them. Point out mistakes afterwards. Martin was a beginner, all over again. The train pulled into the huge glass-roofed central station. Martin looked up and saw the perfume logo, 4711, emblazoned across one end of the roof. Could be his lucky number. He was nervous as he waited for the students to arrive. They were just as nervous as he was. They knew he was a newbie. Martin had the feeling it went well. He was exhausted after those first 90 minutes. He wondered how people taught 4 or 5 lessons a day. As he crossed the square back to the station, the tempting fried potato and onion smell of hot Reibekuchen potato cakes filled his nostrils. Martin decided to treat himself to 2, with apple sauce. The tram was full. It always was at 7:15 in the morning. Martin squeezed himself in next to the doors. He was careful to stand just out of line with the optical sensors near the floor to allow them to close. If people blocked them, the tram couldn't move off. The driver would bark in Cologne dialect over the tannoy. Passengers would get stroppy. Trams and people had to be on time. Martin was on time that day, in fact deliberately a little early. He tried to read his current Dickens novel. He had to pull his elbows in and bring the book closer and closer to his face as more and more people jammed into the carriage. They tutted loudly if he didn't make room, as if he could. Martin was on his way to his first English class at one of Cologne's oldest and most esteemed insurance companies. It was a beginner's course and a prestige assignment. The company resided in a distinctly uninviting building complex. It was notorious for having been designed by an architect who had been sympathetic to the National Socialist cause. Martin was struck by its sheer, stark ugliness. He stepped into the lift. It already contained several sharp-suited men and smartly dressed women. They all looked somewhere between solemn and downright miserable. Martin greeted the occupants cheerily, as you did in Germany. Guten Tag zusammen. Silence. No reaction. Eye contact avoided. He got out of the lift wondering what he'd done wrong. One of his students later explained. The people in the lift could spot right away that he didn't work there, but his worst sin was not wearing a tie. Martin found the high-ceilinged room he was teaching in. He sat himself down at the head of a long, shiny conference table next to the flip chart at the back wall. He waited for his customers to arrive. On the stroke of 8, they filed in quietly and arranged themselves around the table. They all looked at Martin, some of them as if he was about to drill their teeth, some like rabbits caught in the headlights. Martin felt sorry for them, so he started with a bit of German. The sigh of relief was almost tangible, if not audible. The facial expressions around the table turned mostly into smiles. He'd reduced their fear of drowning. Having put his patients at ease, Martin did his standard first lesson. He had them all practicing greetings, farewells and introductions. By the end of it, Martin felt rather pleased with himself. So did his students. It was music to his ears when some of them used what they'd learnt on their way out. Goodbye, Martin. See you next week. The Irish pub was buzzing. In the crowded, smoke-filled bar, everyone was shouting to be heard above the blare of the jukebox and the loud hum of conversation. It was Saturday night. Along with the regular early evening crowd, there were 6 or 7 of Martin's German friends there. Around the same number of his teaching colleagues had also come. Martin sat at the bar with his statutory pint of Guinness. Next to him sat Elke, a tall, slim and charismatic German girl. She usually sat behind the front desk at the language school. She laughed. Du siehst ein bisschen aus wie Jack Nicholson. Martin didn't think he looked a bit like Jack Nicholson, but he took it as a compliment, even though Jack was a good 20 years his senior. Elke was a few drinks ahead. She seemed determined to lure the star of the evening before anyone else did. Also, wie fühlt es sich, ein Rockstar zu sein? Martin didn't know what it felt like to be a rock star, but he got her drift. Don't ask me, Elke. I probably got the gig because they don't have the money to get a band in. But you have a lot of girlfriends, yes? Martin laughed. Loads of them. There's a queue outside. Elke wasn't sure what a queue was. Eine Schlange? She giggled. Ah, but I'm the first, yes? You're certainly up front, Elke. Elke wasn't sure if that was funny, but laughed all the same. You have a drink with me at the end? Martin nodded. He finished his Guinness, stood up, gave her a peck on the cheek, and went over to the little stage area. He got his acoustic guitar out of its case and checked it was still in tune. He tapped the mic to make sure it was on. The jukebox was still blaring away. It took several minutes of frantic semaphore to get someone to turn it off. There was no lull in the animated conversation. Martin waited in vain. He decided to start anyway. Good evening. A few people shouted back. A ripple of applause died away swiftly. Most people just carried on talking. This is a love song I wrote. Martin struggled to make himself heard above the roar of conversation. It was fueled by a high-octane mixture of Kölsch, Guinness, Kilkenny, Bushmills and Jamesons. Everyone had to talk louder than everyone else. The people sitting and standing closest to him were mostly his friends. They were talking the loudest. He soldiered on bravely to the end of the song. Martin went over and turned up the little PA amp, which was sitting on a chair behind him. The speakers were mounted on stands at head height. The crowd now received the full impact of his voice and guitar. The landlord came over and turned the PA down again. Martin battled against the hubbub. His carefully crafted songs disappeared in an acoustic fog. Buried in drunken monologues, raucous laughter, bar counters shouting, the constant clinking of glasses and crashing of trays. When he listened to the tape at home later, the audience had practically drowned him out. Martin's colleague Neil was from County Meath. He was clearly impressed. "Fair play there, Martin. Never knew you had it in yer." He'd seen a few sessions in his time. "Oh, cheers, Neil. Makes a change from teaching Germans." "Pint?" "Love one. Thanks, mate." After buying him a pint of the black stuff, Neil complimented Martin on his singing and playing. "You got some nice things going on the guitar there, Martin. Little bit of Neil Young. Made me think of fishing on the Boyne when I was just a ween. Fierce good river for trout it is. I was with your man Sean, went to school with him." Elke butted in to Neil's anecdote. She frog-marched Martin over to where she'd been sitting at the bar, thereby ensuring his fullest attention. She disappeared to the little girl's room. While Elke was powdering her nose, Amanda shyly sidled up and congratulated him. "That was great. I had no idea you'd be that good. Shame everyone kept talking so loud." "Oh, thanks. Glad you liked it. Felt like a bit of a waste of time, though. Might give it one more go." "Let me know if you do, okay?" Amanda was one of his teaching colleagues. Martin was about to offer her a drink. Elke came back and almost pushed her out of the way. Elke stared pointedly straight ahead as she sat back down next to her rock star. Amanda raised her eyebrows at Martin with a grin. Elke was jealous. "Wer ist die blöde Tussi eigentlich?" Luckily, Amanda didn't understand the German for stupid tart. She got the hint, though, and disappeared into the crowd. Martin was a little the worse for wear. Not so much so that he didn't suss out Elke's game. His hormones were in overdrive, but his common sense was in neutral. He let her continue to ply him with drink. At closing time, they ended up walking arm in arm to her place, just a couple of blocks away. Martin wisely left his car parked where it was. Martin would liked to have experienced a night of passion with Elke, followed by a romantic breakfast in bed. After climbing into bed with her, he fell asleep snoring on her breast, much to her annoyance. She retired to the couch. Their passion remained unconsummated. Martin woke up with a mouth like parchment, his head a symphony of pneumatic drills. Elke endeavoured to soothe his ills with a double espresso laced with lemon juice, in which she dissolved 2 aspirin. After grunting a brief farewell and giving her another peck on the cheek, Martin walked slowly back to the pub, loaded his stuff into the car and drove home. He slept all day that Sunday.